about the conflict resolution and in terms of understanding the dynamics of the conflict in Ghana and beyond. He's joining us on the telephone right now. Festus Aboagye, good evening. Thank you for joining us here on Hot Edition.
Yeah, Chief, thanks for having me.
Now, we're just hearing the statement from the Osei to the second, was set to resume the mediation in the Bawku conflict between the 28th of April to May 1, just within this 3-day period for the initial, conversation with the major stakeholders in this conflict. What should be the areas of focus for this mediation team led by Osei to the second in finding lasting peace in Bawku?
This is quite a tough question. I thought you were asking me the significance of, the renewed engagement or the reactivation of it. Let me try and, approach it from that angle. I think this press release, short as it is probably the best news coming from around the Bawku conflict at this time. To answer your question, we need to place the context of the conflict at this stage. Place the conflict at this stage in the right perspective. We are somewhere around 1957, when at that time there were two Bawku Nabas, the Kusasi and the Mampusi, which some authors have reflected as two kings, one kingdom. And that, is not a tenable situation. At the time, Kwame Nkrumah was able to address the impasse by establishing what we now know as the Opoku Afere or Afere-Opoku Committee. And then also with the benefit of the Supreme Court at the time, which quashed the Mampusi writ against the recommendation of the Opoku Afere Committee to recognize the Kusasi as the Bawku Naba. This time, however, we don't have those kinds of leverages because the Supreme Court has already pronounced itself on the conflict. And some have argued that what we have now is a situation of illegality. But the challenge is that when one defies the Supreme Court ruling of 2003, the only person in this country who can help resolve that issue is the Nairi, the king of the Mampusis. And so far, it does not appear that the Nairi is going to disclaim Alhaji Saidu Aboagye, who was installed in February, I think, of 2022 or 2023. So the engagement of the Asantehene at this time comes probably as a last resort when we have exhausted all the legal, traditional, whatever avenues that we could have. Now, the challenge that his committee is going to face is what I pointed out. There has to be one Bawku Naba. Traditionally, it is only the Nairi who can disclaim the rival chief. But nobody else can disclaim the Bawku Naba, who is a Kusasi, because they don't regard the Nairi as their legitimate authority. The court has already pronounced that the Naba Abugrago Azoka II is the rightful Bawku Naba. So let's wait and see how the Asantehene is able to deploy all these traditional skills that he has to get the Nairi to accept an outcome that includes the disclaimment of the rival chief. There may be other, gives and takes, other conditionalities that the Mampusis may ask for. But those are some of the questions that he needs to address.
And on the matter of you give a very, very important detail on the history, the background, and where we are now. How will this mediation being led by Osei to the second now be able to, as it were, address the mistrust that is also one of the major factors fueling this particular conflict, and the politics as well that this politics gets into? How should they address these two fundamental factors that influences the conflict as we're seeing now?
Well, to a very large extent, any mutual acceptance of some of the key proposals that the Asantehene will put before the two parties would be an approach that neutralizes the involvement of politics or political parties in the Bawku conflict. It is going to be seen largely as a traditional way of mediating between traditional leaders. But having said that, the outcome that results in one Bawku Naba is necessarily not going to be the end of what you call mistrust, but other challenges around, for instance, the socio-economic aspects of traditional authority, i.e. access to land and resources, for instance, which includes the Bawku Central Market that we shouldn't rule out. It wouldn't address the proliferation of small arms and light weapons that have found their way into the Bawku conflict. Neither will it address the proximity of the conflict and the likelihood, indeed, the idea that some terrorist elements have already engaged in the Bawku conflict. So those will be the remaining political issues or issues that will need to be addressed politically, because it's only the state that will have the instruments, if you like, to make Bawku a weapons-free zone in whatever form that the government decides to approach that. So it's going to be a very long process, and the Asantehene's, ability to break the ice, at least to bring the two parties together at Manshia Palace to talk, is a good start. Because in all mediation, the primary objective is to open up dialogue and get the parties to talk and learn gradually to trust one another or to respect one another and to learn to live together. Because the fact of the matter is that the Bawku, what do you call them? The Kusasis and the Mampusis cannot change where they are geographically in Ghana. They can select their friends from across the country or elsewhere, but they cannot unwrite the history that has brought them together as close, indeed, integrated neighbors. Then there will be other benefits. This afternoon I've just posted, for instance, that this conflict has had other impacts that we have not even begun to talk about. That Kusasis and Mampusis, slowly but steadily, are now not marrying or intermarrying. And intermarriages are a good mechanism for conflict resolution. So we're ending up, as some academics have suggested, turning Kusasis into homogeneous community or a homogeneous community and turning Mampusis into a homogeneous community, i.e. segregating the two communities who live within their own localities and are not willing to accept the presence of one or the other, neighbors. So, to cut a long story short, this is very good news. And let's hope and pray that indeed I know, or I think, not that I know, I think that before the press release came, the staff of the Asantehene, together with maybe the government and other stakeholders, would already have approached the two parties who would have accepted to come to Menchia. Otherwise, the press release would not have been issued. One wouldn't expect that once the press release has been issued, one or both parties are now going to challenge the Asantehene or disregard or ignore the humble invitation for them to come to Menchia Palace. And of course, let me add that one reason why they are coming to Menchia Palace is not necessarily that the Asante king is superior to the Mampusi king. But we know that that environment, the Bawku environment, is not a safe environment. That even an IGP who is visiting is shot at. That members of parliament are assaulted or their properties and so on and so forth. So that may be the underlying factor of now looking for a neutral place, which is also significant because that's a traditional locality, i.e. the Menchia Palace of the Asantehene. And I don't think anybody should read any other meaning as to who is superior and who is not superior, or that kind of arguments.
Yeah. And I do appreciate your time on this matter. And there are many who have also called for the consideration of a possible declaration of state of emergency because of the considerable evolution of this particular conflict, where, as we have just seen, the IGP issuing that directive to police officers not to move in the area without any protection because two of the police officers have been gunned down 2 days ago. Is it one that you would support, that a state of emergency be considered in this area?
We have heard this call for states of emergency several times, especially regarding Galamsey. But a state can deploy significant coercive measures without necessarily declaring a state of emergency. Indeed, given the description of the Bawku conflict that you've just made, which has informed the IGP to curtail visits by families and even the police personnel, military personnel moving in and around Bawku, as freely as they might wish to. The state has the resources to reinforce the presence of the security forces. It has the capacity and indeed the legal authority to change the rules of engagement. For instance, it can impose other measures or other restrictions beyond this, is it dawn to dusk curfew that prevails at this stage. There are so many things that can be done without necessarily declaring a state of emergency. One of the things I would rather appeal to the government to consider is to reinforce the security forces. But before doing that, to also rotate them. Move the old ones out of the area because the morale is obviously very low. They have been exposed to risk and dangers. They have attracted, lack of cooperation or withdrawal of confidence, whatever, from the local population. So when you get to that stage, a new crop or a new group of security forces will come fresh, without all the setbacks that their predecessors might have experienced. I think those are some of the things that the government could consider doing. And to find a strategy of isolating Bawku from the inflows of small arms and light weapons. It can easily be done by the state. But I'm not too sure whether the state has, addressed its mind to this suggestion and subsequently deployed requisite measures to ensure that it becomes extremely difficult for people to smuggle arms and ammunition into the Bawku conflict. But if we do everything about the mediation which succeeds, and we do not address these conflict de-escalation dynamics, it's going to take a much longer time for Bawku to become a safer area to now encourage people to return to Bawku, including all the government officials, the teachers, the nurses, the judges, and so on, who have fled and left Bawku to become a ghost town. So my recommendation will not be for a state of emergency declaration, but rather for strength.
Hello, Colonel? Right. Unfortunately, we lost Colonel Festus Aboagye, retired, on the telephone.
Hello.
Yes. I'm
not hearing you.
Yes. I think that you made the point quite clearly, and that you do not support this call for the state of emergency. And thank you so much, Colonel Festus Aboagye, retired there. He is a conflict and mediation expert, joining us with his thoughts on